In Jesus' name, amen. We come to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 again. That's our first in our division tonight. Let me give you a little pop quiz. We're talking now in this book, we're talking really in sections by chapters. And a couple of weeks ago we covered chapters 1 and 2. And we called it The Problem Declared. And what really Solomon was looking for is to answer the question, is life really worth living? You remember that saying, he had vanity of vanities, all is vanity, vexation of spirit. It's all empty, it's all futile, because we're all going to die one day. And Solomon, though, did find out that life really is worth living. We gave you about 4 things from chapters 1 and 2, how he came to some conclusions. The first one was that man is only a cog in a great big wheel. We're not the end, we're just part of what's going on. Secondly, he came to the conclusion that man cannot understand it all. We don't know everything. I have thought many times and have made this statement many times, you know, if God could be figured out, He wouldn't be very big. If my little peanut brain could figure God out, He just really wouldn't be very strong, very mighty, very wise, very knowledgeable. We just don't understand it all. I was having lunch today with a man here in town, not a member of our church, but has reached out to me, and I'm reaching out to him. Lost his wife a few months ago to death and cancer, and just like Virginia. And he called me and asked if we could have lunch, and we've done it about 6 times in the last several weeks, and talking about this. And one of the things that we shared today with him is that never try to figure God out, because you'll never know why. Watch it. Bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. Only God decides that. But here's the wonderful thing. Even what we consider to be the bad things, God works them around for the good things. Because all things work together for good to them who love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. So regardless of what happens, God is working it out, watch it, primarily for His good, which in turn is the best thing for us. And so man is only a cog in a big wheel. He doesn't know everything. Thirdly, man's pleasures do not satisfy. Man's pleasures never satisfy him. That's chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. The first one, man cog in a big wheel, I should have given that. Chapter 1, verses 4 to 11. B or 2 is chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. And then, fourthly, death ends all. Chapter 2, verses 12 through 23. Then we started last time talking about the problem discussed. This is going to take up 8 chapters. chapter 3 through 10. Chapter 3, if you want to write this down, chapter 3 deals primarily that to show us that God has a purpose in our lives. God has a purpose in our lives. Now, we're going to look at a couple of verses in here just to show you what we're talking about. But go down to go to verse 1. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born, a time to die. A time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised thereby. That is, things that you're supposed to do. He hath made, now watch this, he hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning unto the end. Where he says there, he has set the world. He's talking about their eternity. Before, think about this. Before in the beginning, God was. Something to think about. That is so simple, but people they can't figure that out. How could he create the world if he wasn't here before he created it? Isn't that simple? But you see, they don't want to accept creation because if they did that, they'd have to accept that God was before it. That makes him the strongest, mightiest power being ever known to mankind. And the stronger always rules the weaker. You see, man knows that if there's a God, they're going to have to answer to him. And they don't want to answer to him. They want to be a God to themselves. They want to take care of themselves. They want to be only what they want to be. And so we see here that God has a purpose in our lives. Everything he talks about. Notice verse number 12. I know that there is no good in them but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. He said, man, if there is a time to profit and a time to work, if there's a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war, live all of it. Because God is ordaining those times. I was reading a book a couple of weeks ago, and the writer makes a statement that I've heard so many times. He said, most people think that they control their own life. That is so false. There is so much pride in that, it's not even pathetic. You know, it is pathetic. It's not funny. I am my own master. No, God controls everything. I got tickled. I was telling somebody, I may have used this in a message sometime, but I was talking to a guy, and I told him, I said, there's a time to be born, there's a time to die. God knows when you're going to die. He said, well, what if I just go out there and I jump in front of a speeding train? I said, it's your time to die. I mean, that is so ignorant. You say, well, could God keep him from it if it wasn't his time? I would dare say that if you jump in front of a train, you are going to die. There is a time, there is a season. But I always remember this. I love this in the Bible where it says, and this too shall come to pass. Brother Roloff used to sing a song, a little chorus, hold on a little longer, pray on a little longer. The matter that you prayed for, it's on its way and paid for. Just hold on a little longer. Hold on. Boy, if we'll just get this down, stay faithful, because you and I have the privilege to live God's purpose for our lives. We can be in partnership with God, or we can be in opposition to God. It's up to us. I don't know how many times over the years, though, I've heard preachers say this. It is a sin to ask God why. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. Why? Because Jesus was impeccable. Jesus never sinned. And he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You see, it's not wrong to ask God why, but the amazing thing is, be happy when he tells you the answer. God has a purpose in our life. Secondly, chapters 4 through 6, God gives riches only according to his will. I say it this way. God gives us all he can trust us with. One of the great lessons that I learned from Dr. Bill Rice was the fact that I ought never look at what God places in my hands, I ought never look at it as mine. It's his on loan to me. I am a steward of what he gives me. Now, I want you to look at a couple of things here in chapters 4 through 6. Notice in verse number 6, chapter 4. Better is an handful with quietness than both hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. See, be happy with what you have. But he said there, don't be, that where he says there, better is handful with quietness, that word also could be contentment. Have you ever, let me ask it this way, you don't have to answer out loud or raise your hand, but have you ever wanted more than what you have? I have. I wonder if maybe God wouldn't give us more if we honestly, spiritually became content with what we have. Happy, joyful with what we have. My dad told me one time, it was in the summertime, I was probably playing, I don't think they have it, Brother Joey, they don't have it now. We called it Pony League. They don't have that anymore now? Select ball, okay. Ours wasn't select. We had a league and teams, and it was just for the summer. But it was called Pony League. I remember it was the first time that we could play loose bases, and we had steel cleats. We could have steel cleats, and we could lead off a base. I thought I had arrived. And we were playing one night, and I pitched, and by the grace of God, we won. And I'll tell you what, I was so proud of myself. Inadvertently, I was just bragging to my dad about really how good I did. And I had a good night pitching. I had a good night at the plate hitting. And I said, Dad, I'm just really coming on as a ball player. And my dad said, son, I'd like to buy you for what you think you're worth. I'm going to buy you for what you're worth and sell you for what you think you're worth. He said, I wouldn't have to work another day in my life. That stuck with me. And you know, the amazing thing is God listens to us, even listens to lost people, because I wasn't even saved then. But the next game I pitched, it was horrible. God brings you right back down to reality. See, I didn't pitch a no-hitter that first game. So somebody had to catch those balls they hit. And they had to throw them to first base to get somebody out. The catcher had to catch them. So really, all I was doing, throwing it up there and hoping that the worst wouldn't happen, they wouldn't hit a home run. I learned a tremendous lesson that night. Don't be bragging on yourself. If somebody compliments you, accept it gracefully. I say to our men that are studying for the ministry, every once in a while you're going to preach a good sermon. I mean, you preach enough, you'll preach a good one. And somebody's going to come up and tell you how good it was. Be gracious. Thank them for that. But don't you ever believe it. Because if God didn't bless you, you would not have preached a great sermon. When people say to me, well, Pastor, God spoke to my heart, or that message was a blessing, I always say this, and it's not trite. I say, well, thank you. Thank the Lord for that. Why? It's all Him. It's all Him. I don't know what it was, but Sunday when I was coming to the church early Sunday morning, I don't know why, the thought came into my mind, what if God doesn't bless me today? What if God doesn't allow me to be blessed today to preach and teach? And I'll be honest with you, man, I got half scared coming here Sunday morning. But then I realized from Luke, he said He'll give the Holy Spirit to them that ask, to them that obey. I said, well, Lord, I'm going to obey You, and I'm sure asking You, and a great peace came to my heart. Now, drop down in chapter 4, drop down to verse number 13. Better is a poor and wise child or youth than an old and foolish king who will no more or no longer be admonished. Don't ever get so old that you can't take correction, that you can't learn, that you cannot still grow. Matter of fact, I told the fellow I was having lunch with today, I said, you know, the amazing thing is I've been doing what I'm doing for 57 years, and I'm still learning. I've been studying this book for 57 years, and I told you Sunday I saw something in there last week that I'd never seen before. I'm sure I'd read it, but it never jumped off the page and slapped me upside the head. Don't ever stop learning. Go to chapter 5 now. Notice in verse 4. Remember now we're talking about the matter of riches, wealth, the things that God gives you. He said, when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for He hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay it. Now you say, well, what if I vow something and I can't pay it? God will help you pay it. God will help you pay it. But you have to do your part. It might be that maybe you'll stop going out to eat, 7 or 8 times a week so you can pay your vow. You say, preacher, on faith promise, do you always vow what you know you can pay? No, that's not faith. I've been doing Faith Promise for years and years and years and years and years. And let me tell you something, I've never promised less than what I've given the year before. Why? It's not faith. And the thing is, Virginia and I, and now without her, I have never missed being able to make my faith promise. Oh, and by the way, and my tithing, and my giving to the building fund. I'll just tell you all this. I used to give money to the building fund. What was the other one, Lou, that I gave to? The buses? Is that what it was, buses? And so when we paid the buses off, I just gave that same amount up to the building fund. Why? Well, God was blessing me on it, and we didn't have anything else going at the time. So now I just give that same amount. You see, the amazing thing is, God does miraculous things for me. Let me tell you something else. God does miraculous things for my children. I think one of the reasons is that they have watched God take care of their mom and dad, and they believe that God will take care of them, and they do it. Man. Oh, by the way, my oldest granddaughter got her driver's permit today. That's scary, folks. Vonda sent me a deal, messaged me, and had a picture of her and Kylie in the driver's seat. Said I let her drive home from getting her permit. I sent back and said, nervous? Question mark, question mark, question mark. She texted me back and she said, on one turn, my whole life came in front of me. And I texted her right back and I said, all the memories I have of you and Wynn scaring me. Last time I was at Wynn's, he said, Dad, he said, when Vonda and I started driving, were you anxious about it? I said, no. He said, I am scared to death to turn Wyatt loose with a car. I said, well, make sure he knows to put his seatbelt on, make sure your insurance is paid up, and let him go. If you don't have confidence in him, you better put his license in a safety deposit box somewhere so he can't drive. But when we make a vow to God, and you know, I think that's more than money. I think a vow to God is faithfulness. Lord, I'm going to be faithful to you. Oh, how many times I have people say, boy, preacher, we're back. We're going to be faithful. We're going to be faithful. You don't see them for 6 weeks. They're faithful somewhere. Brother Steve sent out some cards to people that hadn't been here in 3 or 4 years and just asked them if they'd gone someplace else or if they're planning on coming back. And one family sent in and said, we're back. They're here one Sunday. They're gone again. Okay, now, drop down to verse number 10. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. It's futile. Why? Because you'll always think you need a little more. Verse 15. As he came forth of his mother's womb naked, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor which he may carry away in his hand. I heard a cute story some time ago. It said that this real rich guy passed away. And one of the things was that he wanted his friends to make cash offerings to go into his casket. And then he was going to be cremated. And so everybody came down, his friends' money. I mean, they put thousands of dollars in there. And one fella came down, the last one, he came down, and he wrote a check for $1 million, put it in, took all the cash out. I don't think that guy was going to take it with him, but why in the world you'd want to do that? But the amazing thing is that's true. You know, when you were a little infant, what did you own? What did you possess? Nothing. When you're laying in that casket, what do you possess? Nothing. Again, we were in discussion today at lunch, and he made a statement. He said, you know, your wife has gone to her reward. I said, no, she hadn't. No, she hadn't gone to her reward. He said, she hasn't. I said, no. Hebrews says, and their works do follow them. She hadn't cashed in yet. It's all the influence that she had on people, that they had on people, that they had on people. I said, look at D.L. Moody. Sunday school teacher led him to Christ. What if that was the only soul that man ever led to Christ? Look how many people D.L. Moody preached to and saw saved. That Sunday school teacher has part in every one of those. Who led him to Christ? They have a part in what D.L. Moody did. And think about all those that went out and whatever they did for God, D.L. Moody and that Sunday school teacher and whoever won him, it all just keeps multiplying, coming back in. Coming back in. No, Virginia's going to reap one of these days, but she's still sowing. So she sowed in the lives of people, and those people now are sowing in the lives of people, and it's all going to get better. And go to chapter 6 real quick. Verse 7. All labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. Yeah, I talked about this last week. You know, you go to a buffet and you eat and eat and eat. I'm not going to eat anything else the rest of the day, but you do. Why? Because you get hungry again. You get hungry again. See, I think one of the things spiritually here is that we ought to continue to have an appetite for the things of God. You know, the more that I'm learning, the more I want to learn. The more that I'm understanding, the more I want to understand. Notice in verse 12. For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life, which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? Let me remind you, you say, well, we know what's going to be later. Solomon didn't. He did not have the teaching of the resurrection. He had no teaching about the church age. We know from New Testament teaching what shall be hereafter. This is where we have it over the Old Testament saints. Chapter 7. Notice verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Why is that? Well, if you have a good name, you have good character, that's because of God. Then when you die, you're in paradise in the Old Testament. You're with the Lord here and under grace. So that day of death is actually better than the day you were born. Think about how many people have been born that rejected the gospel and now are in hell. The day of their death was worse than the day of their birth. But for you and for me, the day of our death has been while absent from the body is present with the Lord. And if we can ever grind that into our mind, that is a reality. That is true. We don't die and go in just the grave. Our spirit goes into heaven. Notice what he says here. Verse number 3. Sorrow or grief is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. It's made well, it's made good. Have you noticed how quick we forget the blessings, but how much more we understand the hard times that come in our life? I've become convinced of this more and more and more, that the difficult things of life God ordains because He has to crowd us to Himself. He has to push us toward Him. If we could learn daily to just cast ourselves on Him, if we daily could learn to just walk with Him, be obedient, be committed to Him, I think we'd probably miss a lot of things. But we ought to rejoice when God does it because it brings us into a closer relationship with Him. Notice in verse 9, be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Learn to control your anger. Be angry and sin not, Paul said. Well, how can you do that? Be mad at the sin and love the sinner. Verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which He hath made crooked? Don't try to change things that God has ordained. Let me give you an example of that. If you're a man, don't try to be a girl. If you're a girl, don't try to be a man. Just consider what work God did. I was reading, we're going to stop there tonight. We're just out of time. I'll start there next time because there's some more good stuff in here. I was reading an article by a man who was the head of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medical School up in New York. Well known, well respected. Spoken in medical conventions all over the world, written textbooks on medicine and psychiatry. He came out with an article and he said, you cannot change your DNA. If you were born a man, you are a man. If you are born a lady or woman, you are that. He said, now, here's the kicker. You can decide you want to be something else. But even if you have the surgery to change it, you're not. You've just messed yourself up. You know what? Now he's a quack. People in the medical field say, he just doesn't know what he's talking about. And just the year before, maybe a month before, 2 weeks before, man, he was a genius, highly respected. But now because he disagrees with them and agrees with what is true, because if you are born a male or a female and there's no way to change that, then to become a homosexual is a choice. God didn't make you that way. So he has to become a quack. Well, I don't think he walks like a duck. I don't think he quacks like a duck, so he's not a duck. God bless you. We're going to stop there.